Hello everyone, I'm Emily with Chipped and Polished, and in this video I'm going to be refinishing these nightstands. Throughout this video I'm also going to be sharing a cost breakdown for these, and then at the end I'll share a profit breakdown, so you can get the same look or something similar even if you're on a tight budget. Normally the first cost in a flip is the piece itself, but these I actually got for free. I have something called the Freebie Alerts app on my phone, and it tells me whenever there's free furniture near me. That being said, I probably spent about $2.50 in gas as the first kind of expense for these. It was about a 30-minute round trip, and I ended up getting 2 sets of end tables, or nightstands in this case. So dividing that cost in half, about $2.50 in gas. Next cost would be the cleaner that I'm using to scrub everything down with. For this project, I'm using 50/50 water and vinegar with a little bit of Dawn mixed in there. The cost of that vinegar and Dawn would be about 65 cents. I like to kind of switch back and forth between a couple of different cleaners, this one and then Crud Cutter for something that's more heavy duty, for a piece that's just kind of dirtier, has been sitting longer, has more grime on it. Next, it was time to strip off all of this thick white paint. Here I'm using Clean Strips Premium Stripper. This stuff was pretty thick, so I had to use a few more coats than a normal. So I used about half the can, which came to $9.78. The other costs that I'm counting here are the chip brush that I'm using to brush on the stripper, which was $1.78. A few pairs of those blue gloves, they were 20 cents each, and I used 3 pairs, so 60 cents for those. And then a foil pan for trash, that was 62 cents. And in a couple of minutes, you'll see me using a stripping brush just to get out any of the paint out of the details. That was $1.90. For some things, it's hard to measure an exact amount of how much I use and how much it would have cost. So I'm trying to kind of round up for that and just add it into any cost of doing business. So for instance, the first thing in that would be water. I'm going to say about $5 in water between cleaning the first time and then cleaning off the residue from the stripper. Also, in cleaning off the residue from that stripper, I used some paper towels, probably about 50 cents worth. If you're enjoying this video so far, please go ahead and hit that like button. Also, if you're new here, please go ahead and hit subscribe so you can be notified every time I post a new video. Also, comment below and let me know what are some things that you do when you're flipping furniture to make it more cost-effective and budget-friendly. For Clean Strip, I like to apply it thick and just watch it so it doesn't dry out. It usually only takes about 10 or 15 minutes to take effect. Unlike other strippers, it's recommended that you don't cover it with plastic while you're waiting for it to work its magic. And they do have an afterwash product that you can use, but like you saw me doing, you can just neutralize this with water. Once all of the paint was stripped off and all of the residue was cleaned up and everything had time to dry out, it was time to start sanding. I knew I was going to be staining the tops of these nightstands, so I started with a 100 grit sandpaper before moving on to a 120, a 150, and then a 180 grit on those. For the bodies, I scuff sanded those with a 180 grit. Altogether throughout this project, I probably spent about 65 cents on sandpaper. I ordered my sandpaper off Amazon in bulk, and I'm going to link all of these products in the description. Like I said, here I'm just sanding with that 180 grit to scuff things up, smooth everything out, and gives my paint and primer something to grip onto. I also took a couple of minutes here to clean up any leftover paint around the drawer housing, just to make sure that that was a smooth, uniform surface. Sanding the insides of the drawers isn't something I always do, but in this case I wanted to clean up a couple of stains that were left behind after cleaning. I'm pretty sure that the really tough one was some ink. Next, it was time to fill in the old hardware holes, so I grabbed some painter's tape to put across the back of each drawer. This will keep what I'm using to fill the holes from falling all the way through, but it'll also protect the wood from splitting when I go to drill the new holes. To fill these old hardware holes, I use Bondo all-purpose putty. This is a 2-part epoxy filler. It has a cream hardener. Once you mix those two together, it's going to get hard pretty fast. I like to use a small plastic bag, just grab some, and then put in just a tiny amount of the hardener. I use probably $1 worth of products between the Bondo and then a little bit of plastic wood for other miscellaneous scratches. And the plastic bag that I used to mix this up in was about 4 cents. Most of the time I'll mix Bondo up on cardboard, but when it comes to filling old hardware holes, I find the piping bag method a lot easier. While that Bondo was taking a few minutes to dry, I went ahead and started sanding the edges of the tops, just to go ahead and get that down to the raw wood and prep it for stain. Once I was finished with the tops, I took 180 grit sandpaper and sanded the Bondo smooth. To find the center for the new hardware holes, I just took this ruler across each side diagonally, made an X, and that gave me the center. Since all of my sanding was finished, it was time to go ahead and get a damp microfiber cloth and wipe away all of the dust. Side note, once you have something to raw wood, if you apply water, that's the color you would get if you sealed it as is. After wiping away all of the dust, it was time to go ahead and mask off these tops. Between using the tape on the back of the drawers and then using it to mask things off here, I probably spent about 15 cents in painter's tape. And yes, I'm using Walmart bags as my plastic to mask off the top. They're free, it works, it reuses something that I already have on hand. You can also see that instead of trying to get the painter's tape to line up perfectly along the edge, I'm just going to trim it with a razor blade. I feel like this saves a little bit of time, but it also gives me a perfectly clean edge. With everything masked off, it was time to go ahead and prime, but I didn't realize that I had set my camera up staring directly into the sun. I think this still gives you a pretty good idea though. I enjoy using the spray primers. I feel like it goes a lot quicker. Once that primer was dry, I gave everything a once over with a 240 grit sandpaper to smooth out any bumps. And again, wiped away all of the dust. Sanding dust like this can really wreak havoc on a new finish. Since this wood seemed to have a lot of red tones, I was a little bit worried about bleed through, so I used about half a can of shellac or $5.64 worth. This will keep any tannins from bleeding up through the new paint, but it'll also prime the spots that didn't get a coat the first time since the drawers were in. Next up, it was finally time to paint. I grabbed a filter so I could sift my paint through it and then stirred it really well. I had about half of a can left of Dixie Belle's Sawmill Gravy left over from another project, so I spent about $11.98 in paint. The one filter that I used here would have been about 13 cents. Once my paint had finished filtering, it was time to go ahead and test it on some cardboard before spraying it. Another cost here would be electricity, anything for power tools, charging batteries, anything like that. It still counts. One of those things where it's kind of hard to measure how much I would spend like per project. I'm going to say about $10. And much smaller costs here would be the zip ties to pull open the drawers. I'll probably spend about 18 cents on those and I'll reuse them. As always, sanding in between coats of paint will help everything lay down nice and smooth. I use a 240 grit here. After a second coat of paint, which I somehow didn't film, it was time to go ahead and stain the tops. I used Varathane's Roanoke stain here. For just the tops of these, I think it was probably about 75 cents to $1 worth of stain. I'm choosing not to count the cost of the rag because I usually just get old t-shirts from around the house and cut those up and they last me forever. The last and probably most important step in this process is to seal everything. I use Minwax's polyacrylic in the ultra flat color for the bodies and the drawers, and then the satin color for the tops. And I probably used about $2 worth of polyacrylic and then spent about 60 cents on the paper plate. And that we are forever sanding is the reality of furniture refinishing. So again here, sanding that polyacrylic in between coats with a 400 grit. And I did 2 coats to the bodies and the drawers, and then 3 coats to the tops. As a finishing touch, I like to add Howard's Feed and Wax to drawers and anywhere there's going to be wood on wood. These already glide smoothly, but it helps with that, conditions the wood, and makes everything smell good. I used about 62 cents worth of the Feed and Wax, and then since it is kind of tough to get out of the brush, I did use a special scrubby soap on it. That was about 35 cents worth of the scrubby soap. And lastly was these knobs. I spent $14.99 for 6 of these. I've seen a lot of other refinishers use these, but this is my first time with them and I love them. And here's a quick reminder of where this project started. And here is the after. I feel like this set went from plain Jane with that thick white paint to just kind of a classic farmhouse, almost Pottery Barn style. I love how the brass knobs look against that clean cream colored paint, and the wood tone just really sets it off. The total cost for this project was $88.09, so this all happened for under $100. This set has already sold for $350, giving me a profit of $261.91. I would love to know your thoughts on this project and this video. What would you do to make it more cost effective? What would you have changed about the design? Also, do you think $350 was a good price point? As always, thank you so much for watching. If you haven't already, please go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe for more furniture flipping videos. Have a great day.